Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 26 wildcard. And the reason why I'm doing this video early is because I think we only have a few days towards the deadline. And Game Week 26 wildcard is interesting because we had so many FA Cup impacts changing Game Week 28 and our chip strategy around it. Not to mention, of course, a lot of us have invested into Liverpool. And I think rightly so. When you actually look at the results of Game Week 25, you could see players like Van Dijk, Salah, Trent all doing well as expected. And even, for example, Arsenal, a team that we've trusted in all season, doing incredibly well with Martinelli having a super haul. That double game weeks are important, and the reality is now you have a much more safe standard way to go towards these Brentford assets because they no longer blank. And then with some Tottenham assets like Kane, there's no reason to really move out of him because he's such a stable, strong asset that will actually hold you throughout this entire period. And if you're a non-Kane owner, there's even more reason to go into him. So with the yellow flagged assets that I've shown here, I've showcased them because I feel like these are the key picks towards the wildcard that I think are best towards the left-hand side, and then towards the right, you have some replacement options. Now, of course, with the forward position, looking at Tony, you also have Iheanacho there, and even Yohan Wissa, of course, depending on what the full news and the extent of it with Tony is. Right now, as we understand, there could be a sort of disciplinary hearing for Tony in April, and that actually means that he should be able to play all the fixtures in Game Week 29. However, Tony has another sort of yellow flag attached to him, which is these suspensions. He's on 8 yellow cards now, so of course if he inches towards 10 yellow cards, he will actually get an automatic 2-game suspension, which will also preclude him from being able to play football. As far as replacement options, I think Watkins is the most strong, stable option. He has a really good fixture on Game Week 28, and simply put, he covers extremely well, and he's also been performing well, plus is on penalties, something that Mbuma will probably benefit from. But you know, he's, I would say, less of an interesting player to pick, especially if Tony's out. As far as March and Estupiñán, these are players that I think I would prioritize because their attacking returns seem to be a little bit more consistent. The reason why is because March positionally is going to be always playing within these forward positions, whereas with McAllister, he has the flexibility, or at least De Zerbi has the flexibility of being able to play him as a 10, but also as a center mid. And a lot of it has been talked about McAllister and his lack of clinical finishing. I think the reality is he just hasn't played within the 10 position enough to actually get the hauls that you would expect. Whereas, of course, when you look at Mitoma and March playing under De Zerbi, they've consistently played left wing, or right wing. So this is kind of the situation here. I think McAllister is going to be a good side grade from March if we seem to hear that he's not ready to play. And with Estupiñán, he's someone who I would say probably has overperformed a little bit, because if you actually look at his underlying stats, he isn't that interesting as an asset from the defensive position when you compare to some of the top assets in FPL. And so I think Dunk is a very reasonable replacement here, especially if we get some news that Estupiñán isn't close to full fitness. Now, if we actually head towards the defense of what I would consider to be a wildcard template, for me, the nailed players are Kepa and Raya as keepers, and then Trippier, Zinchenko, and Dunk are the 4 out of 5 players that I would say. And Dunk here has been used because I think Estupiñán doesn't seem to be close to full fitness, so Dunk is sort of a placeholder here for Estupiñán. Of course, one Brighton defender should be nailed in your wildcard. Zinchenko is someone that I've actually added into this wildcard prospectively after just watching him these last few weeks and just seeing how involved he is. One thing that actually is so interesting, not only, for example, if you look at his inverted midfield performance versus Everton, but just look at how active this Arsenal team looks towards providing him chances with set pieces. You're seeing this Arsenal team go further away from direct free kicks and direct corner kicks towards the target man, and actually trying to look for these interplays where Zinchenko actually might be the last man getting a shot. And that's exactly how he scored his goal when Odegaard assisted him a while back. Whereas with someone like Gabriel, he's getting less of those chances, and Zinchenko, of course, still has the benefit and the added sort of pro of being an open play and getting the most amount of touches in the system. He is prone, I would say, to also being substituted out a little bit early, but I think he is someone who, unlike White, is more than likely going to last 80 minutes a game, just because he's essential to the way that this Arsenal team builds up and tries to dominate teams on the front foot. As far as me, he's obviously replaceable with Pinnock as well, but I think me is probably the option that a lot of us will go for. His underlying numbers are very close to Pinnock, and simply put, we have seen a sort of previous goal scoring record history with him. So I think there is some security there in going for me. And James, for me, I think it is the asset here that you could say is completely flexible, because the position that James holds in this team is entirely to hold within the structure. Because what is the chip strategy we're going for? We're going for a wildcard 26 and a bench boost 29 structure. Your free hit could actually come in whenever you need it, or specifically around double game game weeks in the future, which would be 34/37. And I think if you're looking at this sort of trajectory here, where you're looking towards maximizing with a bench boost in 29, the position, or the player rather, in James's position needs to be someone who doubles in 29. Now, of course, you're going to have free transfers in the future, and presumably you could bring in a United player such as a Shaw to replace someone like in the position of James, or like in the position of me, if you don't like the double game week fixtures for Brentford later on. But James is interesting because I feel like if you think that there is some upside to be caught with this Chelsea team, if you think Potter can turn things around, or if you think that a new manager bounce is impending and this Chelsea team, because they're so strong on paper, could do well immediately right off the back, then James, I think, is a good asset to sort of gamble on. And ultimately, Chelsea still have very, very good fixtures regardless. You could simply just go towards someone like a Burn, a Schär, or a Botman. And I think these are all great replacements towards James if you don't trust Chelsea right now. Because as you can see, clearly I've gone for Kepa and James, which is obviously a Chelsea double up. You might not really support that. You might just prefer going for Newcastle assets. And I think Trippier is that asset who is nailed. Simply put, a lot of us have hold up value within Trippier. He still has performed exceedingly well this season. And yes, whilst you could argue that this Newcastle team have overperformed in terms of clean sheets, the reality is in open play, Trippier is unmatched. Just watching him, the amount of chances he creates, most recently that Liverpool game is a great example of how he's able to get such consistent hauls even in spite of losing his clean sheets, how close he is as well to getting bonus points even if he loses clean sheets or even before the clean sheet points arrive. So for me, Trippier is one of those assets that I would absolutely not drop. That's kind of how I view Trippier in the game, and I think he's essential there. In this wildcard specifically, if you move towards a Kane structure, you're going to need to make some salary sacrifices, and I don't think Trippier is worth that sacrifice. As far as the midfield, if we move on to that, I've actually added March here because it seems like he's probably ready to play soon. I'm expecting that could obviously use March as a placeholder for McAllister. That's going to be the like-for-like replacement. Some people will be thinking towards going for someone like a Maddison from Leicester. But once again, I have to speak towards, if you're going to wildcard in Game Week 26, why not just capture the upside fully of Brighton? With Brighton, I don't really like backing double defense Brighton. I think their attacking assets are much better. There's a much larger pool of assets, specifically within the midfield position, to now capitalize on, because you'll be taking Salah out of your team with a Game Week 26 wildcard. So why not just simply just go for a Brighton midfielder here? They're cheap, and they can sit in your bench later in the season. So that's kind of my thought here. And so Mitoma is someone who I think has been exceptional, and March as well, and I've put them on equal footing within the cheat sheet. So these are two assets that I'm really interested in playing. McAllister, of course, a great replacement. And if you're not interested in going for McAllister, I suppose you could also be tempted by someone like an Evan Ferguson, but that would probably prompt you towards going for a Brentford midfielder, which would not be so interesting to me. As far as Saka, Odegaard, and Rashford, these are assets that I think are still essential. And Odegaard, of course, a lot of people are going to be asking questions about him because Martinelli has completely, I guess, destroyed Odegaard within Game Week 26, specifically with his performances with Nketiah being benched in those two games. What I would say, however, is why not look back towards what the structure would be when Jesus comes back into the team? Martinelli probably will not play that sort of advanced forward position as he does. And even though there will be, of course, times where he sort of interrelates with the position with Trossard, because, of course, you could see both Trossard and Martinelli taking and occupying centre forward positions. What I would say is, if you look at examples like the first Everton goal where Saka sort of pokes away at the ball and creates an assist for Martinelli, that sort of position I would not really expect Martinelli to be in when Jesus is back into the team. And I think that does impact Martinelli's numbers in the future, and it will also simply just impact him from a minutes perspective, because now you have the depth around Jesus and Nketiah, and then you also have the depth around Trossard and Martinelli. And whilst Martinelli and Trossard could both play that sort of false nine position, the issue, of course, is just simple lack of minutes, which I don't think Odegaard is prone to. Odegaard was still able to score. We remember he also missed an absolute sitter previously in some of those games, and the underlying numbers for Odegaard and Martinelli are still very, very close. They're also very close to Saka, but remember, Saka has penalties. So I think the landscape of FPL is where you don't want to touch these Arsenal assets. You want to go for nailed assets going forwards, and I still think Odegaard at this point in time is still the better pick to go for, even though I know a lot of people wildcarding Game Week 26 will be super tempted to move towards Odegaard and move back into Martinelli if that was the transfer that was done in recent weeks, which I actually did myself. I'm still probably going to say that keeping Odegaard makes sense. And as far as Rashford, I don't think there's much to be said. He's probably the most informed player in the world. Of course, Mbappe and other players are up there, but simply in the Premier League, there's no one close, not even Erling Haaland at this point in time. So Rashford is practically essential. And then by Game Week 29, you could be making some transfers around some of these midfield assets. You could be incorporating Fernandes back into the team. You could be simply incorporating Shaw. depending on how you actually want to prioritize around this United team. Keep in mind, of course, that Shaw seems to have a small injury, but it doesn't seem to be a major issue. So for now, of course, Rashford is that sort of nailed asset, and you need to navigate around Game Week 28 because we're not going to plan to play any chips around Game Week 28. And as far as the forwards, just to round things out, we're going to go for Kane, Haaland, and Tony. For me, this is because I think that Tony will actually last towards Game Week 29. So of course, you could just think about bidding Tony after Game Week 27, which is of course his beautiful fixture run. And then with Haaland and Kane, simply these players do not blank. They are so consistent. They are much better than some of the other premiums in the game, such as a Salah, such as a De Bruyne. You've got all the flexibility in the world that you want to go with in the midfield positions. And worst case scenario, if you really want to downgrade away from Haaland or downgrade away from Kane, you have that flexibility as well by being able to go into players like Watkins or Solanke if you so must. And the same thing goes with Tony as well. If you want to go out at Tony and you want to strengthen another position in the team, use the spare money you have to, let's say, upgrade Odegaard into Fernandes, you can go from Tony to Solanke and still keep this Haaland and Kane structure. And that's going to be the wild card in terms of the full 15 players. As far as actually how you'd line up in Game Week 26, the way I would do it is like so. So I would play Dunk, Zinchenko, James, and Kepa. Now, of course, this is a big risk to go with double Chelsea again, especially against a Leeds team that I think looked very good under Javi Gracia in their first game. However, I still think that this is a great chance to gamble on these Chelsea assets. I think James always has upside, as we have seen. Of course, he doesn't seem to be as attacking as he has in the past, but I have to say, yeah, I still think that there's upside there to be caught with James. And then I think with Kepa, he's just been very consistent. We know that at least the defensive solidity of Chelsea is there. Of course, Thiago Silva's out, but it's still better than a Me, for example, versus Fulham, one of the best attacking teams. And also one of the teams that actually have some players that are very consistent and actually breaking their underlying numbers. Like, look at how good the form Manor Solomon has, and look at Mitrovic, for example, coming back into the team. That's going to definitely illuminate how you think about Brentford and whether they can keep clean sheets there. Of course, if you want to keep it safe, I think that there's a chance you could play the effective ownership game with Trippier, which I don't really like. I think he'd probably be best served to be at the back of the bench. You could obviously just play Me ahead of James as well if you're kind of fearful of going for that double Chelsea defense. As far as the rest of the team, though, I think I would go with Dunk and Zinchenko. You could obviously think about replacing Dunk with Me as well. I think they're quite similar. Of course, we saw that this West Ham team were red hot when they actually scored 4 goals almost in 20 minutes versus Nottingham Forest, but ultimately I think there's probably better chances for a clean sheet just because Fulham are a better attacking side than West Ham, and that's been proven out by the underlying numbers and just simply goal scoring this season. Zinchenko, as I said, is going to be one of those essential Arsenal assets for Arteta and probably for our FPL teams if you are moving towards the structure in the Game Week 26 template. And then with Rashford, Odegaard, Saka, Mitoma, the reason why these players are picked is simply because with March, obviously he might be someone who doesn't make it towards Game Week 26, but you can actually keep him on your wild card and then have him for Game Week 27, where he hopefully plays a lot of minutes over Game Week 27. Now, of course, you could also go for McAllister, but I still think his ceiling is a little bit lower than Mitoma, so therefore I would prioritize Mitoma this week. And then with Tony, Haaland, and Kane, all great fixtures for them from a goal scoring point of view, because we know that teams like Fulham, even though that they've gotten a lot of clean sheets, they are still very capable of giving teams great chances. Brentford at home is a different beast, and then with Haaland and Kane, just very consistent regardless of the quality of opposition. So this is sort of how the Game Week 26 wildcard would play out in terms of team selection, and this is the Game Week 26 wildcard. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.